This is episode 19, where we explore how science fiction mirrors our hopes, fears, and the blurred lines between reality and illusion. Welcome to this deep dive, where we're cracking open a collection of insights and arguments about sci-fi's role and impact on how we see the world.
And our mission today really is to unpack these sources together. We want to pull out the most important ideas, and see what they tell us about our own anxieties, our perceptions of the future, especially when it comes to technology, what's real, and honestly, what it even means to be you.
Okay, let's jump right in then. One of the strongest arguments coming out of this material is, well, that science fiction might just be the most vital artistic genre we have right now. And the reason they give, it's pretty straightforward, actually, because most people aren't reading the latest white papers on machine learning or, wading into journals on genetic engineering.
Exactly. So how do we, the general public, get a handle on these massive technological, these huge social shifts happening all around us? It's through the stories we consume. Think about the impact of movies like, say, The Matrix, Her, or TV shows like Westworld and Black Mirror. These narratives, they kind of create our cultural understanding, our shorthand for really complex ideas.
And that, according to the sources we're looking at, puts a real burden of responsibility on sci-fi creators.
A huge burden.
If they're shaping public perception so powerfully, they really need to depict these complex scientific and social dynamics, well, carefully.
Absolutely. Because if they're not careful, the material suggests they risk spreading misinformation, or maybe even worse, directing our attention towards the wrong fears
Right.
or the wrong problems.
Which brings us neatly to a pretty significant critique raised in these sources.
Yeah.
This idea that a lot of science fiction fundamentally confuses intelligence with consciousness.
Yeah, and this confusion is key because it's presented as the root cause of this widespread sort of unfounded fear of robot-human wars, the classic AI takeover scenario.
That Terminator stuff.
Exactly. While it makes for great drama, the argument is that it distracts from the actual concerns.
So the real threat isn't like conscious machines wanting to enslave us.
Not according to these specific sources, no. They steer us towards a different kind of conflict altogether. A potential divide between a small, technologically augmented elite people powered by algorithms and AI, and a large, increasingly disempowered underclass. It's a future where the battle isn't consciousness versus human, but more like algorithmically enhanced power versus, well, algorithmic disempowerment.
Almost like a new evolution of class struggle,
Yeah.
but driven by technology this time.
Precisely. And there's a really provocative point made here that when you're trying to understand the future impact of AI, Karl Marx might actually be a more insightful guide than, say, Steven Spielberg.
Wow, okay. That's a spicy take. And it makes you wonder, right, if sci-fi is sometimes focusing on the wrong tech fear, maybe some stories aren't really about the technology at all.
Well, the sources explore that too, this idea that certain sci-fi films might function more as allegories for completely different anxieties.
Like which ones?
They use Ex Machina as a prime example. On the surface, you see the programmer, the beautiful, manipulative AI. It feels like a story about our fear of intelligent machines.
And the AI seems to confirm that fear by escaping, right? That's the climax.
Exactly. But the deep dive into this source material suggests that the film might not primarily be about the human fear of intelligent robots.
So what is it about then?
The argument is that it functions more effectively as an allegory for the male fear of intelligent women, and maybe a deeper underlying fear that female liberation might somehow lead to female domination.
Whoa. That's a completely different lens to view that movie through.
It reframes everything, doesn't it? And the sources underscore this by asking a really fundamental question that, honestly, most viewers probably don't stop to ask. Why would an artificial intelligence, a non-organic entity, even have a sexual or gender identity?
That's a good point.
Sex is a biological characteristic, right? For organic multicellular life. Its presence in an AI narrative, the sources suggest, points to us projecting our own human social anxieties, our own power dynamics, onto the technology itself.
Okay, so while sci-fi can sometimes misdirect fears or act as allegory, the sources do credit it with capturing a crucial danger. There's one theme where it seems to show real insight.
And what's that?
The risk of technology being used specifically to manipulate and control humans.
Ah, yes.
Yep.
This is what they call the trapped-in-a-box theme. And the examples that immediately come to mind, the ones highlighted in the sources, are The Matrix and The Truman Show.
Right. The Matrix, where humanity is literally enslaved within this vast, simulated reality, totally unaware that their perceived world is controlled by machines.
And The Truman Show, a more subtle kind of imprisonment, maybe, where one person's entire life, his home, his relationships, his experiences, it's all a fabricated reality show, meticulously controlled, scripted by actors and producers.
Both are incredibly powerful explorations of control and perception. But interestingly, the sources offer a fascinating critique of these films. They argue that despite their brilliance, they ultimately seem to kind of recoil from the most radical implications of the scenarios they present.
Yes, exactly. They share this common fundamental assumption that somewhere inside the manipulated person, there exists an authentic self, something untouched by the manipulation.
And that somewhere outside the simulation or the show, there's an authentic reality waiting to be discovered.
So the hero's journey becomes about shedding the illusion, finding that core authentic self, and reaching some kind of authentic promised land.
Yeah.
But here's where it gets really interesting, according to the analysis we're looking at. The supposed authentic promised land, it often ends up being, in almost every significant way, identical to the very fabricated reality they just escaped from.
Wait, how do they justify that? That seems counterintuitive.
Well, take Truman. What's his big goal after he breaks out? What drives him?
To find Sylvia, his old sweetheart.
Exactly. The one person who seemed real to him, who wasn't in on the show. But if he finds her, the sources argue. What happens? His life just becomes the perfect Hollywood romantic comedy fantasy, the very thing the Truman Show was selling to millions in the first place. The film doesn't suggest he'll find some truly alternative way of being. He just wants to live the same ideal scenario, but for real.
Okay, I see the point. And Neo in The Matrix.
When he takes the red pill and enters the real world, what does he find? He finds a reality still filled with all the same basic human struggles and conflicts, people driven by fear, lust, love, envy, loyalty, betrayal. It's just a different, grittier backdrop.
Right.
The source actually suggests The Matrix would have been far more profound if it had ended with Neo discovering that the real world he accessed was just another larger matrix, leaving him with another choice of pills, Keep searching for the true reality.
Okay, so the deep implication here, the one drawn from this technological and scientific revolution we're in, is that authenticity isn't something you escape to. It's potentially a myth altogether.
Exactly. The fear is being trapped in a box, the simulation, the TV show. But the sources argue we often don't realize we're already trapped in a box, our own brain, our own body, which is itself inside an even bigger box. Human society and all its constructed fictions, its narratives.
So escaping one layer of manipulation
Often just leads you into the embrace of a larger one. They use this historical pattern. Peasants revolt against the Tsar only to end up under the arguably worse control of Stalin. It's escaping one matrix for another.
And this really unsettling idea is that discovering the world is manipulating their play. You might lead you to realize that your core identity, the you thought was authentic, is itself a complex illusion, something created by neural networks and shaped by all these external forces.
It's a lot to grapple with, for sure. But here's a crucial counterpoint these sources make, which I think is really important. Even if we are living in some sophisticated simulation like a matrix, our mental experiences are still undeniably real.
You mean the emotions, the sensations we feel?
Absolutely. The fear, the pain, the joy, the love, those aren't fake just because the external stimulus might be digital rather than, say, physical atoms bumping together. They are real subjective experiences.
The sources use a really powerful, even disturbing example to drive this home, don't they?
Yes, that hypothetical scenario. Imagine advanced rat scientists from another galaxy, Zircon, running a perfect simulation of human history. Even if the gas chambers of Auschwitz were just, electrical signals in silicon chips within that simulation, the experiences of the people inside, the pain, the fear, the despair, were not one iota less excruciating for that fact.
Wow. So pain is pain, fear is fear, and love is love, even in the Matrix.
Exactly. It's the reality of the experience itself that counts. And you can explore and understand that subjective reality of your mind, whether the inputs are coming from physical atoms or manipulated digital signals.
Okay, so we have real experiences, but maybe authenticity is a myth, and our minds are products of manipulation. This really challenges the conventional narrative, doesn't it? Especially that common sci-fi trope of the heroic human mind triumphing over technology.
It completely flips it on its head. The traditional story is, humans gaining control by building tools or by the pure, free human spirit prevailing somehow. But the sources argue the mind isn't some free subject shaping reality. It's very much an object shaped by history, by biology, by society.
Even things we cherish like freedom or love?
Mm.
Are those shaped too?
According to this perspective, yes. They're presented as being like a stone knife that somebody else shaped. Ideals crafted and given meaning by external forces, often to achieve their own goals, not necessarily yours. The argument, drawing on what they call the best scientific theories, is that the mind is never truly free of manipulation. There isn't some untouched, authentic self just waiting to be liberated.
Because our very ideas about these concepts are constantly being influenced by everything around us.
Precisely. Think about how powerfully movies, novels, music, advertising. Think how all media carves out our understanding of the world and ourselves. Romantic comedies shape our idea of love, right? Just like pornography shapes ideas about sex, or action movies like Rambo shaped ideas about warfare for a generation. You can't just mentally delete the influence of Hollywood or advertising or social media. It's baked in.
Which means the typical sci-fi story, where the heroic human mind defeats the manipulative robot or the evil system, it's kind of missing the deeper point.
Absolutely. The problem isn't just whether the mind can fight the robot. The more fundamental problem, they argue, is that the mind that created or is fighting the robot was itself already a product of earlier manipulations. So simply defeating the external technological threat doesn't necessarily free us because our own desires, our fears, even our sense of self are already influenced, already shaped.
Okay, given this rather bleak assessment of the heroic escape and authentic self-narratives, the sources single out one particular animation as surprisingly far more realistic and troubling than many big-budget sci-fi films, which is Pixar's Inside Out.
Yes, it's seen as a film that, quote, brutally dismantles that classic Disney myth of the hero finding their authentic self and making these free, triumphant choices.
So Riley isn't just a girl dealing with moving. There's more going on.
From the perspective of these sources, yes, definitely. Inside Out is interpreted as adopting a much more neurobiological view. Riley is depicted not as having a single authentic self, nor is she shown making free choices in the traditional sense. Instead, she's portrayed as, essentially, a huge robot managed by a collection of conflicting biochemical mechanisms.
Which are personified by joy, sadness, anger, fear, and disgust, all operating from headquarters in her mind.
Exactly. And her journey isn't about identifying with one true core emotion like joy and making it dominant. The turning point in the film, the real growth, is realizing that her well-being depends on the complex interplay and acceptance of all these different mechanisms, even the uncomfortable ones like sadness.
Ah, right.
So Riley isn't some fixed self. She's portrayed as a complex, evolving story produced by the constant conflicts and collaborations between these internal forces.
It's kind of incredible that Disney managed to market a film with such a radical, almost anti-individualist message, isn't it?
And that it was a huge success. The sources sort of muse that perhaps its success lies in being a comedy and having a fundamentally happy ending. It allows many viewers to enjoy the emotional narrative without necessarily grappling with the potentially more profound and perhaps unsettling neurobiological implications about the lack of a single free self.
Speaking of unsettling implications and challenging our ideas about happiness and control, the sources highlight Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, written way back in 1931. They call it arguably the most prophetic science fiction book of the 20th century and say it becomes more relevant with each passing year.
Yeah, and it's fascinating because it's not an overt dystopia like Orwell's 1984, which is all built on fear and surveillance and pain. Brave New World presents a future society that has, on the surface, eliminated war, famine, and plague. People live in peace, they have prosperity, they're healthy, engaged in endless consumerism, have easy access to sex and drugs, and the supreme societal value is just happiness, contentment.
And the method of control in this seemingly utopian world, how does that work?
The fundamental assumption in Huxley's world is that humans are essentially biochemical algorithms. That's the phrase they use. Algorithms that can be scientifically understood, hacked, and manipulated through technology and social engineering right from birth. And the genius of Huxley, according to the sources we looked at, is showing that people can be controlled far more effectively, far more securely, through pleasure, through contentment, through love even, rather than through fear and brute force like in Orwell's world.
It's unsettling because, yeah, on the surface, what's actually wrong with a world where everyone is happy and satisfied all the time?
That's the central, difficult question the novel forces us, the reader, to confront. And it comes to a head in that pivotal dialogue between the architect of this world, the world controller Mustafa Mond, and John the Savage.
He's the outsider, right? Raised outside this system on a reservation, knows about Shakespeare and God and all the old Messy stuff.
Exactly. And the savage challenges Mon's view of this controlled, happy society. Mond calmly lays out his argument. This civilization simply has absolutely no need of nobility or heroism. Because those things, Mond says, are symptoms of political inefficiency. They arise from struggle, from unstable conditions. A properly organized society eliminates these messy conditions, wars, divided loyalties, difficult temptations. People are conditioned from birth to do what they ought to do, and conveniently, what they ought to do is also what feels pleasant and allows their natural impulses free play.
And if any unpleasantness does somehow creep in, if someone feels bad.
Ah, well, there's Soma, the perfect drug. Mon describes it as providing a holiday from the facts. It calms anger, it reconciles enemies, it makes people feel virtuous effortlessly. He famously calls it Christianity without tears.
But the savage just recoils from this, right? This engineered ease, this lack of struggle.
He argues passionately that tears are necessary. Struggle is necessary. He quotes Othello saying, "If after every tempest come such calms, may the winds blow till they have wakened death." He's implying that tranquility is only meaningful after you've experienced the storm.
He tells that story too.
Yes, the story of the Girl of Matsaki, where young men had to endure biting flies and mosquitoes just to prove their worth and win her hand. While Mon just counters with the efficiency of his world, you can simply have girls without hoeing for them, no need for the struggle.
The savage's core critique seems really profound here.
It is. He says they haven't learned to endure unpleasantness, they've just abolished it. He references Hamlet's famous soliloquy, whether it's nobler to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and points out that Mon's world does neither. They just get rid of the slings and arrows entirely. He calls it too easy.
He even declares he wants something with tears for a change. It's quite a moment.
And Mon points out they even have VPS treatments, violent passion surrogate, that provide the physiological feeling of fear and rage, but without any of the actual danger or the emotional inconvenience.
Which leads to the savage's incredibly powerful declaration at the end of that scene.
He refuses the comfort completely. But I like the inconveniences, he says. I don't want comfort. I want God, I want poetry, I want real danger, I want freedom, I want goodness, I want sin.
And Mon's chillingly calm summation of all that.
In fact, Mon says, you're claiming the right to be unhappy.
Wow.
And after Mon lists the full catalog of horrors that come with that right, aging, sickness, poverty, pain, fear, death, Cilicia, the savage's final defiant acceptance is just, I claim them all.
To which Mon simply replies, "You're welcome," leaves you cold.
It's an incredibly unsettling exchange, isn't it? Precisely because Mon's logic is so hard to refute within its own framework, and because the savage's fate is anything but triumphant in the end.
Yeah, that's the thing. Unlike Neo escaping the Matrix or Truman sailing into the sunrise, John the Savage's story doesn't end with him finding freedom or some authentic promised land. He retreats to the wilderness, becomes a kind of celebrity spectacle, and ultimately hangs himself.
And the sources interpret this ending as Huxley's deep doubt. Unlike the more hopeful sci-fi that often came later, Huxley seemed to question if escape was even truly possible, not just from the system, but because he doubted if there was anybody to make the escape in the first place.
Meaning, if your brain, your very sense of self, is itself a product of the Matrix, then escaping the Matrix means...
What?
What? Escaping yourself?
Escaping the narrow, conditioned definition of self, perhaps. And the sources conclude by suggesting that this possibility, exploring what it might mean to escape that narrow definition of self, is not only worth exploring, but might actually become a necessary survival skill in the 21st century.
Wow. Okay. This deep dive into these sources has really shown us how science fiction isn't just entertainment, is it? It's like a cultural mirror, reflecting our deepest hopes and, maybe more often, our fears about technology, control, and ultimately who we are. It sometimes misses the mark, gets things wrong, but it can also offer these incredibly profound, even unsettling insights into manipulation, the potential myth of authenticity, and this truly discomforting idea that a perfectly comfortable, controlled world might be the ultimate dystopia.
Yeah, it brings us right back to that core tension we saw threaded throughout these sources. Our deep-seated desire for an authentic reality and an authentic self clashing head-on with this challenging possibility that authenticity isn't some objective truth just waiting out there to be found, but maybe it's an illusion itself. And that escape from manipulation might not be possible, or at least not in the straightforward way we usually imagine it.
So it leaves you, the listener, with some big questions, doesn't it? If our minds, our perceptions, our very sense of you are shaped by history, by biology, by society, by all these external forces, and if authenticity is maybe a myth, what does it truly mean to be you? What value can there really be in struggle and pain and inconvenience if happiness and contentment can be so easily achieved, perhaps through manipulation? And how might this idea of escaping the narrow definition of self, rather than escaping to an authentic self, fundamentally reshape how you see yourself and the world around you?